The morning light crept through the thin muslin curtains of No. 12 Clover Lane, glinting faintly on the cracked window pane. The scent of coal smoke and damp laundry lingered in the room as Violet Barnes stirred beneath the worn coverlet. Her mother, already at the copper tub in the yard, had left the back door ajar. The faint clatter of tin basins and the whoosh of boiling water met Violet's ears as she laced her boots by candlelight. Breakfast was half a heel of bread and a cup of thin, lukewarm tea. Alfie dunked his crust into the cup with sleepy fingers. "I had to mend my apron," Violet replied, showing the careful stitches in the faded blue fabric. "Mr. Ransom said I looked a fright last week." She walked quickly through the winding cobbled streets, but as she reached the top of Primrose Hill, everything changed. The Westwick estate sat atop the slope, like a cake left out in the cold, tiered, frosted in pale stone, and utterly untouched by soot or worry. By 7 o'clock sharp, Violet was in the scullery, sleeves rolled and apron soaked. The kitchen rang with activity. Pots clanged. Orders snapped through the air. There was no room for thought, only motion. Lady Edith Westwick. Edith was watching Violet intently through the open scullery door. They had never spoken, of course, but her gaze lingered longer than usual. Later, in the hallway near the servants' stairs, Violet passed by the grand dining room, where the Westwick family was finishing breakfast. Toast, eggs, smoked kippers, fresh fruit in silver dishes. The scent made Violet's stomach knot. "But it's my birthday dinner," Edith insisted, "and I want it to be mine." Violet ducked behind the corner, just as the two passed by, their skirts brushing the walls. It read, "I wish I could change places with someone just for a day, just to know what it's like." Violet stared at the note. It was unmistakably Edith's handwriting. And if she was fast, she might get a moment to glimpse the Westwick library, just a sliver of it through the cracked door as she passed by. A place with hundreds of books and a globe that turned, even though it had no use in such a well-rooted place. She'd never read a novel, not a real one, but she'd held their spines before and imagined what it must be like to fall asleep in silk sheets, reading by lamplight. Maybe, she thought, if you started out in the right place, life stayed warm and quiet like that forever. The morning passed in a blur of wet linens, clattering basins, and steam that fogged the windows of the scullery, until it felt like the whole world had melted into dampness. Violet didn't mind the work so much. There was a rhythm to it, a kind of music in the tap of iron on stone, and the hiss of hot water poured from a kettle. What she minded was how invisible she became when she was doing it. At 10 o'clock sharp, a bell rang twice from the upper floors. That meant the drawing-room fire needed more coal. Violet wiped her hands, wrapped her shawl over her shoulders, and took up the small scuttle. The drawing-room was silent as she entered. The air was thick with perfume and the faint trace of cigars, left over from the night before. Rich tapestries lined the walls. A grand piano stood untouched by the fire, its keys glimmering like teeth. She knelt, pried open the brass grate, and fed the embers 3 lumps of coal. As she shut the grate, a voice came from behind her. "You were quick." Violet turned to see Edith Westwick standing by the doorway, arms folded, a thin book in one hand. Her hair had been pinned into the latest style, coiled neatly with a tortoiseshell comb. "I'm sorry," Miss Violet said, lowering her eyes automatically. "No, I meant that as a compliment. You're the fastest girl we've had. Most of the others slosh water on the rugs or drop ash." Violet didn't know how to respond. Her hands itched to return to the scullery, where she was needed. But the young lady of the house was speaking. "And you didn't turn away from a Westwick, even a kind one." Edith glanced around, lowered her voice. "Did you read my note?" Violet's chest tightened. "I don't know what you mean. The one you picked up. I saw you, outside the schoolroom." Violet hesitated. "Yes, I read it. I'm sorry. Shouldn't have." Edith shrugged. "That's quite all right. It wasn't meant for anyone. I just write things down sometimes. Father says I have too many thoughts for a girl. He says it's unhealthy." Violet wasn't sure what sort of response that deserved, so she simply stood. "What would you do," Edith asked suddenly, "if you could change places with someone for a day?" Violet stared at the carpet. Depends who it was. Edith laughed quietly. Suppose it was me. Now Violet looked up. The young lady was studying her seriously, not mocking, not teasing, just curious. You wouldn't last an hour in the scullery, Violet said. And I wouldn't survive 5 minutes in your sitting room. It wouldn't work, but wouldn't it be something? Edith mused. Just once. No corsets. No tutors. No thank you curtsies. Just freedom. The housekeeper's footsteps approached, heavy and fast. You should go, Miss Violet said. If Mrs. Godfrey finds you chatting in here, she'll blame me. Edith nodded, lips tight. I'll see you again. I hope not, Violet said honestly. Not unless I've spilled something. She turned, scuttle in hand, and hurried back down the servants' stairs. Back home that evening, the house was thick with the smell of bleach and boiled cabbage. Elfie was trying to finish his letters by candlelight, while their mother ironed sheets by the fireplace. How was it today? Mrs. Barnes asked. Fine, you keep saying that. It's always the same. But Violet couldn't stop thinking about Edith's question. What would she do, really, if the world turned upside down and she woke up in one of the rooms with velvet drapes and polished floors? Would she be different? Or would the world crush her just the same, even with money and satin shoes? The next morning brought frost. Violet's breath fogged the air as she walked the route to Westwick House, skirting a frozen puddle that cracked under her boot. She was early. That meant a few quiet moments to herself before the others arrived. She slipped into the laundry cellar, the walls sweating from the copper boiler, and sat for a moment on the wooden stool. She pulled Edith's note from her apron pocket and read it again. The edge is soft now from handling. I wish I could change places with someone just for a day. There were days Violet wished for that too, though she didn't know who she'd want to become. Certainly not a lady of the house. Perhaps a teacher, or a librarian. Someone with books. Maybe. The door creaked. She jumped, hiding the paper. But it was only Edith, bundled in a shawl, holding a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. I brought you something, Edith said, stepping lightly over the threshold. Don't worry, no one saw. Violet stood, uneasy. You shouldn't be down here. I know I won't stay. She handed over the package. Here, I thought it might help. Violet peeled back the paper. Inside was a bar of almond soap, larger, smoother, richer smelling than anything the staff were ever allowed. Why, you always use the same kind, but yours is nearly gone, Edith said. And it's for the napkins. They should be clean, should they not? Violet laughed, once dry and startled. You'll get me in trouble. I'll say it was for my hair ribbons. They locked eyes for a moment, and Violet saw something in the girl she hadn't expected. Loneliness. I have to go, Edith said. It's needlepoint today. I can't think of anything worse. She turned and disappeared into the corridor. Violet slipped the soap into her apron and went back to work. 2 weeks passed. The days grew longer. Spring edged closer, bringing less frost, more slush. The garden at Westwick began to stir with daffodils. Alfie stopped coughing so much in the mornings. One gray afternoon, Violet was sent to the upstairs nursery with a basket of pressed napkins. On her way down, she heard crying. Not from the nursery, but from a closet across the hall. She froze, then knocked. The sobbing stopped. Who is it? Came a voice, muffled, but unmistakably. Edith's. It's me, Violet whispered. The door opened a crack. Edith stood within, tears smudging her powdered face. Her dress had been abandoned for a white slip, and her corset was only half laced. I can't go down, she said. Why not? I hate it. The dinner. The speeches. The stupid toast to my good character. I didn't ask for any of it. Is it your birthday again? No, it's the governor's visit. He's my godfather. I have to smile and sit up straight and answer questions about Latin. You know Latin, Edith sniffed. Some, not enough. And I don't care about it. You've got to go, Violet said gently. They'll be looking for you. I wish I could be you, Edith said again. Just for one night, one day. Violet thought for a moment, then smiled. All right, Edith blinked. What? Let's switch. You're joking. You wanted it. Let's do it. You wear my apron, take the chamber pot, sweep the scullery. I'll go to the library. Sit up straight. Say something about Latin. Let them toast my good character. Edith stared at her. Then she laughed a high, surprised sound. You'd really do it. Why not? You'd be in awful trouble. So would you? For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. Edith reached forward and handed Violet her hair comb, then were mad together. They didn't switch that day. But the idea lingered. Each morning Violet and Edith exchanged glances across the corridor. Sometimes they whispered a few words. Sometimes Edith left a note tucked in a linen stack. One read, "If we changed places and no one noticed, would it mean we're not that different after all?" Another said, "I read a book about a girl who disguised herself and lived free for a month. Let's find our story." They planned their day it would be, when the family was away, visiting London. Only a skeleton staff would remain. The nursery would be empty. The kitchen would be quiet. The house would sleep. On a Thursday morning, Edith left Violet a bundle in the cupboard beside the pantry. One of her older dresses, stockings, gloves, and a borrowed pair of shoes. Tonight, the note said. After supper. Violet's stomach churned all day with nerves and excitement. The dress was too fine, the shoes too smooth. But as she walked home, she kept her eyes high. She saw the houses differently, not as barriers but as possibilities. She cooked dinner with her mother, scrubbed Alfie's collar, and kissed them both good night with a racing heart. Then she slipped back out into the dusk, carrying the parcel under her coat. She reached the back door of Westwick House at 8 o'clock. The side gate was unlocked. Edith was waiting in the scullery. Neither of them spoke. Violet changed into the dress. Edith wrapped herself in Violet's old shawl. "You'll have to clean the front hall tomorrow," Violet warned. "And you'll have to remember not to curtsy to the butler." They stared at each other then, as the clock struck 9. They crossed the threshold, Violet toward the staircase, Edith toward the coal bins. The switch had begun. The carpet was softer than she'd imagined. Violet took one cautious step after another, her boots clicking faintly against the polished floor of the upper corridor. The borrowed dress rustled with each movement, unfamiliar around her ankles. She could still feel the ghost of her apron, the weight of work that wasn't there tonight. At the top of the staircase, she paused to catch her breath. The gas lamps had been dimmed. The house was quiet. For the first time in her life, Violet Barnes was not a servant moving in the shadows. She was part of the house's grandeur, the stillness. The hush. She descended the staircase slowly, carefully, running her gloved fingers along the banister. When she reached the drawing room, she paused in the doorway. It was empty, just as Edith had said. A fire had been left burning low in the hearth. The room glowed softly in its light deep reds, amber, gold. A silver tea service sat on a tray, untouched. A book was left open on a side table. Violet stepped inside. She moved to the window, where she could see the garden, dark and shapeless beyond the glass. The room smelled like lavender and orange peels. It was almost too quiet. She wondered what she should do now. Then she heard it. Music, soft and distant. A piano she followed. The sound, down the hall, past the study, she found a door ajar. Inside was the music room, dim but alive with the sound of someone playing hesitant notes. A simple tune, almost childlike. It was a young man, about 18, seated at the grand piano. He didn't see her at first. He wore a dark wool coat, one glove off as he played with one hand, the other resting in his lap. Violet froze. Then he turned and saw her. "Oh," he said. "Forgive me, I didn't know anyone else was here." She felt herself flush. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't was just walking past." He stood slowly. "You're Lady Edith's cousin, aren't you? From the south?" Violet blinked. Yes, I'm visiting," he smiled. "Didn't catch your name earlier." "Evelyn," she said quickly. "Evelyn Ward." "Well then, Miss Ward, I'm Thomas Pembroke. I'm Lady Westwick's nephew. I arrived from Bristol this morning." He extended a hand. Violet gave him hers lightly. His palm was warm, and his grip gentle. "Do you play?" he asked, nodding to the piano. She shook her head. I've heard music. I like it. Would you like to try?" he asked, stepping aside. Violet's throat tightened. "I wouldn't know how. Just try one note," he said. "Just one." She stepped forward, heart pounding, and pressed a single key. The note rang out, clear and steady. It felt like a bell being struck in her chest. "See," he said. "That's the start." They stood there a moment, neither speaking. The room, the music, the firelight, it all felt so far from the life Violet had always known. She wanted to remember this feeling, the warmth, the quiet, the freedom. "I should go," she said, pulling her hand away. "Will I see you at breakfast?" Thomas asked. She hesitated. Perhaps then she slipped out the door before she could say too much. Below stairs, Edith was scrubbing the scullery floor, with a vigor she had never applied to any piano scale or French lesson. The water was black, her hands red, but she smiled to herself. She was wearing Violet's apron, Violet's patched shawl, Violet's life. And for the first time in ages, she felt real. Mrs. Godfrey had found her loitering in the pantry earlier, and barked at her to fetch firewood. She'd done it gladly. She'd carried coals, peeled potatoes, and folded tea towels until her arms ached. The other servants looked at her strangely. They thought she was quiet, a bit daft perhaps. But none had guessed. She passed herself in the hallway mirror, once hair tied back. Skirt muddy at the hem and didn't recognize the girl looking back. It thrilled her, but the work was beginning to wear. Her arms burned. Her knees were bruised. From kneeling, she'd given her dinner to the hall boy because he looked so hungry. Now her stomach gnawed at her. Still, she'd never felt prouder. Upstairs, Violet stood before the long mirror in the guest bedroom, watching the firelight flicker against the silk of Edith's dress. Could it really be just for tonight? She stepped out of her shoes and sat on the edge of the bed. It was the softest thing she had ever touched. The pillow smelled like lavender water. Her fingers wandered to the embroidered handkerchief on the side table. She held it gently, somewhere in the house. A bell chimed the hour. 10 o'clock only one night. She lay down. The mattress welcomed her like a sigh. And for the first time in her life, Violet Barnes fell asleep in a bed that belonged to a world not her own. Morning light streamed through the heavy brocade curtains, painting warm stripes across the guest room's floral wallpaper. Violet stirred, blinking slowly as the unfamiliar sensation of cotton sheets and feather pillows embraced her like a gentle cloud. For a few blissful moments, she had no idea where she was. Then she remembered the switch. She sat up too quickly, nearly dislodging the lace-trimmed coverlet. For the first time in her life, she had slept alone in a clean bed, in a warm room, without being roused by a knocker-upper or the cries of a neighbor's baby. The luxury of it made her dizzy. But there wasn't time to soak in it. She had to play her part. A soft knock came at the door. Violet sprang to her feet, smoothing the borrowed nightdress hastily. "Yes. Good morning, Miss Ward," came a voice, soft, polite. "Shall I bring your tea?" It took her a moment to remember she was Evelyn Ward now. "Yes, thank you," she managed, trying to sound casual. A young maid entered with a tray, her eyes respectfully downcast. She placed the tea on the side table, curtsied, and left. Violet stood there, staring at the china cup. No one had ever brought her tea in bed before. She didn't even know what kind it was. She sipped carefully. It was hot and delicate, with a taste like burnt. Her hands shook a little as she set it back down. Next came the maid with her clothes. Edith had chosen a pale blue dress with pintucks and pearl buttons. Violet allowed herself a small smile. Of course, she picked the fussiest one. She whispered. Dressing took longer than she expected. She struggled with the corset, wriggling and muttering under her breath until she gave up trying to lace it fully. Her boots felt like instruments of torture. She brushed her hair as best she could, and hoped no one would look too closely at breakfast. The dining room was a world apart from the scullery she'd left behind. A long table stretched beneath a glittering chandelier. White damask tablecloth, polished silver, and crystal dishes glinted in the morning sun. Mr. Pembroke, the gentleman from the music room, was already seated, reading the paper. When Violet entered, he stood politely. "Miss Ward," he said. Nodding, she curtsied awkwardly. "Good morning. You look well rested." "I am. It's peaceful here." He smiled at that. "Until my aunt returns. Then there'll be opera and bridge until midnight." The footman brought eggs, toast, and a kipper that Violet barely touched. She sipped her tea and tried to sit the way Edith always did, shoulders back, chin high. She kept her sentences short, and her hands still missed her. Pembroke chatted easily about Bristol, about his studies, about a book of poetry he was reading. Violet could hardly believe she was keeping up. Each time she answered, she expected someone to shout that she didn't belong. But the butler served her politely, and the staff addressed her as Miss Ward. For all they knew, she was a lady, and for that morning she was Bellister, as Edith had already cleaned 2 fireplaces, emptied 4 chamber pots, and scrubbed half the scullery floor before breakfast was even served. Her back ached, her fingers were raw, but she felt more alive than she ever had in her real life of parasols and embroidery. No one looked twice at her as she worked. In the world of the servants, she was just Violet, a pair of hands, a bowed head, another girl in a house full of orders. "Oi, you missed a spot," said Cook, peering at the scullery tiles. "Yes, Cook," Edith replied, crouching again. Mrs. Godfrey, the housekeeper, was everywhere at once, sniffing out slackness and muttering about dust on the stair railings. Edith nodded and curtsied and kept scrubbing by midday. Her arms trembled with exhaustion. She was cleaning brass in the hallway when the bell rang from the drawing room. She dried her hands, adjusted her cap, and entered to find Lady West. "Sister-in-law recently arrived from town. I want fresh flowers in here," the lady snapped. "And see if you can find someone to polish the piano properly. It looks dull." "Yes, ma'am." Edith didn't even glance at the piano. She was afraid if she looked at it, she'd lose her nerve. The instrument she'd practiced scales on every week since childhood was now just a dusty bit of furniture to polish. She returned to the scullery and sat down on the edge of a crate, breathing hard. "I don't know how Violet does this," she muttered to herself, day after day. There was no poetry in it, no romance. Just aching muscles and unending orders. Still, she'd never been prouder of anything in her life. That evening, the switch reversed. Violet crept back to the scullery just after the last candle had been snuffed. Edith was already there, sitting on the coal box, apron wrinkled, hair askew, arms smudged with soot. "How was it?" she asked. "Brilliant," Violet whispered. "Except I think I offended the butler by pouring my own tea." Edith laughed weakly. "I dropped a saucepan, got scolded, nearly burst into tears halfway through cleaning a loo." "You all right?" "Exhausted, but yes." They traded clothes again in silence, passing back their borrowed identities, like costumes after a play. When Violet handed back the hair comb, Edith paused. "Did you speak to Thomas?" Violet hesitated. "A little." Edith raised an eyebrow. "He was kind," Violet said. "And he thinks I'm you." "Well, of course he does," Edith said, eyes sparkling. Violet looked at her. "What if he still likes you tomorrow, when you're you again?" Edith sighed. "Then I'll know he likes me, not just the name." They hugged once, quick and clumsy, then parted into the night. The next morning, all was back to normal. Violet rose before dawn, tied on her apron, and washed in cold water from the jug. She braided her hair tightly and slipped into the familiar rhythm of the scullery, the clatter of pots, the scrape of coal, the sharp scent of soap. But something had shifted. She had seen another life, smelled its perfumes, walked its halls. And now, returning to her old one, it didn't feel quite the same. She knew now that some doors, once opened, never fully closed. Edith, too, returned to her place, corseted, powdered, and buttoned into silk. But something in her posture had changed. She no longer flinched at the sight of the servants, or avoided their eyes. When she passed Violet that morning, she didn't just nod. She smiled. "Thank you," she whispered. Violet nodded. "Any time." Later that week, Thomas Pembroke stopped Violet in the hallway. "You're Violet, aren't you?" he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Yes, sir. I thought so. You're the one I met in the music room." Violet's mouth went dry. I'm sorry, sir. It was a mistake." "No," he said gently. "It was the most honest conversation I've had in weeks." She lowered her gaze. "I'd like to speak again," he said. "If you'd let me. I'm just a servant." "You're more than that." And then he walked away. That night, Violet sat by the fire at home, helping Alfie with his letters. "You smell nice," he said, sniffing. She smiled. "Almond soap. You get paid more now." "No, but I feel different." He looked up at her. "Why?" "Because someone let me borrow a life. Just for a little while. Did you give it back?" "Yes," Alfie nodded. "That's good. Some things aren't meant to be stolen." Violet looked at the soap in her hands. "No, but some are meant to be shared." She didn't know what would happen next. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But she would carry the memory of that night forever. The scent of lavender. The taste of sweet tea. The echo of a piano note she had dared to play. And somewhere inside her, a door had opened. It would never shut again. The rain had begun before dawn, tapping lightly against the servants' windows like a patient reminder. Violet tied her apron strings tighter, pushing back the damp curls from her forehead as she stepped into the gray light of the scullery. Fire hadn't caught properly that morning, and the kitchen felt colder than usual. Steam rose from the laundry pots in wet little ghosts. Her fingers, already reddened by lye and water, throbbed with each squeeze of the wringer. "Violet." Mrs. Godfrey's voice echoed through the corridor. "That blacking hasn't touched." "The boots in the front hall." "Right away, ma'am," she answered, rinsing her hands quickly. There were 5 pairs this morning, some worn, some polished, smooth as mirrors. Violet worked quickly, brushing, rubbing, buffing each boot until her reflection stared back at her, warped and shadowed. By the time she finished, the kitchen bell rang for breakfast. She had only a minute to eat. She sat at the corner of the servants' table and tore a hunk of bread, dipping it into weak tea. Her eyes were heavy. She hadn't slept well, not from discomfort, but from the thoughts circling her mind all night. Thomas Pembroke knew who she was. He had recognized her, had spoken to her like a friend, not a maid, and worse. He had seemed to mean it. She wasn't sure if she should be afraid or hopeful. "You all right, Violet?" asked Meg, the under-housemaid, sitting beside her. Violet blinked. "Just tired." "You always are," Meg replied kindly. "But your hands look worse today." Violet glanced down. The skin was raw and split at the knuckles. A thin film of soap still clung beneath her nails. "It's the laundry. Been doing more of it lately. Well, the house is full of guests now. All their collars and cuffs soaked through in this weather. Bet they don't think about who scrubs it all." "No," Violet said, biting the inside of her cheek. "They don't." Upstairs, Edith was brushing her hair in front of the mirror, her hands moving slowly, methodically. The storm outside gave her a convenient excuse not to attend the luncheon in town. She had no desire to drink tea with cousins, who discussed lace and church flowers while their servants starved. Everything felt different now. She thought of the scullery, the endless labor, the silence that came not from peace, but from exhaustion. She thought of Violet's steady hands, her quiet voice. She thought of how the soap stung her skin and how a simple bed felt like a throne after a day of real work, and she missed it. She turned to the window. In the garden below, the flowers trembled under the weight of the rain. There was no one in sight except for a figure near the gate. He was walking without a coat, holding a flat parcel under his arm. She moved quickly downstairs. Violet was emptying a chamber pot when she heard someone call her name. "Violet Barnes." She turned. It was Thomas Pembroke, standing just inside the servants' entrance, soaked through and smiling. "You shouldn't be here," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "I know, but I needed to see you." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Why?" He stepped forward and held out the parcel. She didn't take it at first. It's nothing much. Just some ointment. For your hands. Violet slowly reached for it, her fingers trembling. You didn't have to, she said. I wanted to, replied. I wanted to do something, even a small thing. They stood in the narrow hallway, the smell of coal and wet earth between them. You were never Evelyn Ward, he said softly. But I liked who you were anyway. She looked down. I'm nobody. No, he said. You're Violet Barnes. You taught me more in one night than I learned in a month of polite society. The sound of footsteps broke the moment. A maid passed through with a basket of linen. Thomas stepped back, nodding. I'll see you again, he asked. Violet hesitated. Then she nodded once, and then he was gone. That night, Violet sat by the hearth, in her mother's small front room, gently massaging the ointment into her hands. It smelled faintly of rosewater and lanolin. The sting eased with each touch. Her mother dozed beside her, and Alfie played with a tin soldier on the rug. Where'd you get that? He asked, pointing to the jar. Someone gave it to me. Someone from the big house. Yes. He looked at her curiously. Was it the same person who said you were special? She smiled. Yes. Alfie shrugged. I already knew that. The wind rattled the window panes. Violet leaned back in her chair, letting the warmth from the fire soak into her bones. She didn't know what would come of it, if anything would. But something had shifted inside her. She would wake up before dawn. Again, she would scrub the same floors. But she would carry the memory of almond soap and borrowed lace like a hidden charm, because sometimes the smallest acts of kindness were the ones that lasted longest. And somewhere in that vast, yawning house, someone had seen her not just as a servant, but as someone who mattered. That, she thought, might be enough. Sunday morning came with a hush. No carriages rattled down the lane. No bells called out for tasks. Even the scullery seemed to rest, bathed in pale light and quiet. Violet had risen early anyway, out of habit. The stillness unnerved her. She wasn't used to silence that wasn't filled with motion, water boiling, brushes, scrubbing, boots to blacken. But this morning, the chores had already been seen to. Edith had arranged it. You two have a half day, Mrs. Godfrey had muttered. At breakfast, lips pursed like she'd swallowed a lemon. Lady Edith's orders. Can't imagine why. Violet didn't ask questions. She washed quickly, tying her hair back with a blue ribbon that wasn't hers. The only dress she had that wasn't patched or soot-stained was slightly too short, showing her ankles in a way that made her cheeks warm. But she'd polished her boots until they gleamed, and for the first time, she left the kitchen door not as a servant on errands, but as a girl out for air. She walked along the edge of the estate, through the small orchard beyond the stables, boots crunching gently over the dew-damped grass. The sky hung low and overcast, but the air was sweet with spring, at the edge of the garden. Near the stone wall, where the hedges grew thick, stood Thomas Pembroke. He looked up as she approached. You came. I said I would, she replied, smoothing her dress without meaning to. I wasn't sure, he said, hands in his pockets. It's a bit mad, all this. Violet nodded. It is. I thought maybe you'd tell me to go away. She looked at him fully now. He was only a year or two older than her, but he carried himself like someone who had always been listened to. Yet here, in this quiet garden, he waited like someone unsure. I thought about it, she said honestly, but I didn't. They walked together without speaking, following the narrow path that wound around the greenhouse. A robin hopped from branch to branch above them, chirping brightly. Why me? Violet asked after a while. Why not some girl from your world? Thomas was quiet for a moment. Because most of them already know what they want. Or at least, what they're supposed to want. You're different. That's because I don't have a choice, Violet said quietly. I work. I clean. I do what's needed. And you did it in a borrowed dress, he said, glancing at her. And passed for one of them. That wasn't my doing. No, he said. But it was you in it. They stopped beneath a willow tree who was drooping. Branches formed a green veil. The world felt smaller there, like a secret pocket stitched into the day. Do you ever wish you were someone else? She asked him. He tilted his head. All the time. Violet looked surprised. "I'm expected to be a barrister," he said. "Like my father, like his father. I'm being trained to argue things I don't believe. For money I won't need. I'd rather write." "Write what?" "Poems, mostly. Maybe a book, someday." Violet smiled. "Do you have any with you?" He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small leather notebook. "Don't laugh. I won't." He opened it to a page near the back and read softly. "There's a girl who works with soap and steam, who walks in other people's dreams. She scrubs the stone, she lights the flame, yet still she answers to no name. But I have seen her. Eyes at rest, the fire banked beneath her breast. The storm she hides in steady grace. A life she bears, a borrowed face." Violet stared at him. "You wrote that about me?" He nodded. "The night I realized who you really were." "It's beautiful," she said, "but you don't really know me." "I'd like to," he said, closing the notebook. "If you'd let me." Her breath caught. She turned toward the garden again, toward the tall hedges and the clatter of a gardener's rake somewhere in the distance. "This can't be anything," she said. "You know that." "I know," he said. "But it doesn't have to be nothing." She turned back to him, and for a moment they stood with nothing between them but the hush of willow leaves and a soft Sunday wind. "Would you write to me?" she asked. He smiled. "Even if you never wrote back?" "I might," she said. "But I'd need to borrow a stamp." They laughed then, quietly, like two children who had stumbled on something precious and half forbidden. She glanced at the sun above. "I should go. Before I'm missed." He nodded. "Same time next week. If I get another half day, I'll speak to Edith." She raised an eyebrow. "You'll ask a lady of the house for a scullery maid's holiday?" "Of course not," he said. "I'll ask a friend." She turned and began to walk back, the grass brushing against her skirts. The memory of the poem tucked inside her like a newly folded letter. Behind her, under the willow tree, Thomas remained. For a moment, watching. The following week brought a shift in the household. Lady Westwick had returned from her extended visit in Bath, sweeping through the manor like a tide of lavender and lace. Her presence altered the rhythm of the servants' lives. Instantly bells rang more often. Tempers shortened, and no corner was safe from inspection. Slates polished, silver spotless, and absolutely no muddy boots near the gallery. She barked at Mrs. Godfrey on her first morning back. "I can smell damp, and I will not have it." Violet kept her head down and her hands busy. Every task was double-checked now. The fire grates had to be not only emptied, but gleamed. The carpets swept with a crisscross pattern. The curtain cords coiled just so. She didn't complain. The memory of Thomas's poem still lived quietly inside her like a glowing ember. It gave her warmth when the soap stung her hands or when her back ached after lifting heavy copper pots. But she was nervous too, with Lady Westwick back. There was no chance of another surprise half-day. She'd barely seen Edith, who now seemed to vanish into the drawing-room every afternoon, draped in ivory and rose silk, entertaining visitors and practicing arias on the piano. It had been 8 days since the willow tree, and Violet hadn't heard from Thomas. She tried not to care. She told herself it was foolish to expect more. Their worlds had collided only briefly, and surely now the door between them had swung shut again. Still, she listened for his footsteps in the corridor. Still, she glanced toward the orchard hedge when emptying the coal. Nothing, until Tuesday evening. She found the letter tucked into her apron when she returned from the drying yard. No one had seen who placed it there. Her name, Violet, in ink on a folded piece of cream paper. Inside, the words were small, neat, and unmistakably his. "Dearest Violet, I hope I haven't frightened you by staying away. I thought perhaps silence might be safest for both of us. But I cannot seem to stop thinking of our walk beneath the willow. If it's still permitted, I'll wait near the orchard gate this Sunday afternoon. If you're there, I'll be grateful. If not, I'll understand. Ever yours, Thomas. Violet read it 3 times, pressing the paper to her chest before folding it into the hidden pocket of her apron. She said nothing of it to anyone. Not even Meg, but all week, her step was lighter. Sunday came with sunlight at last. The clouds had scattered, and the grass sparkled with leftover dew. Violet's hands still ached from scrubbing the copper pans the day before, but she finished her tasks as fast as she dared. She didn't know whether Edith had spoken to anyone on her behalf, but just after noon, Mrs. Godfrey gave her a rare nod. "You're dismissed early today. Don't waste it loafing." "I won't," Violet promised, breathless with gratitude. She changed into the same blue dress, now freshly washed and dried behind the scullery stove, and fastened the borrowed ribbon again. Her boots were duller now, her sleeves a little more frayed, but she still felt like someone else entirely. When she stepped through the garden gate, Thomas was already there. He stood beneath the same willow tree, notebook in hand, eyes fixed on the path as if afraid she wouldn't come. When he saw her, his face lit up. "I didn't think," he began. "I almost didn't," she admitted. "Why?" "Because it's dangerous. And because I don't want to be someone's curiosity. Or secret." "You're not," he said quickly. "Violet, I swear, I'm a scullery maid. You're a person, a clever, funny, brave person, and you're a Pembroke. Your father's a magistrate. Your mother wants you married. Off before next year's season. You're expected to dine with dukes, not stroll through hedgerows with girls who smell like starch and ash." He took a step closer. "What if I don't care?" "Then you're a fool," she said. He laughed, soft and stunned. "Maybe, but I'm your fool." She looked down at her boots, blinking fast. "I brought something," he said, reaching into his coat. She tensed. "Not a gift. No, not really. Just paper." He handed her a small envelope. Inside were several sheets of folded foolscap, densely covered in handwriting. "A story?" she asked. He nodded. "About a girl who swaps lives with a lady, and discovers she can be both." She raised her eyes slowly. "I thought you might want to read it," he said. "Thank you," she whispered. "I will." They stood there, sun filtering through the willow branches, the leaves trembling with a soft breeze. Violet felt the old ache in her hands, the stiffness in her spine. But she also felt seen, truly seen in a way she hadn't since childhood. "Do you think we'll get away with this?" she asked, smiling a little. "No," he said, "but I'm willing to try." She laughed then, not because it was funny, but because it was sweet and ridiculous and just this side of real. They didn't kiss, but as they walked back together, two silhouettes in the golden afternoon, Violet knew the world had changed. Even if no one else could see it, she was still a maid, he was still a gentleman. But somewhere between the scullery and the willow tree, something delicate and dangerous had begun to grow. The days following the Sunday meeting at the orchard brought change, both gentle and insistent. Violet awoke each morning with a renewed spark mingled with trepidation. The letter from Thomas and the pages of his written story remained tucked safely within her apron, a secret treasured more than any material possession. The memory of that golden afternoon under the willow tree was vivid, and it propelled her through the routine hours of cleaning and serving in a world divided by hierarchy. On a brisk Monday morning, while scrubbing the stone floor near the gallery, Violet overheard a conversation between two senior servants. They whispered about a forthcoming ball at the Westwick estate, a grand event to honor the return of a distant relative. The ball, they said, would bring dignitaries and high society to the manor. While the servants talked of extra work and tighter schedules, Violet felt a secret thrill. The ball promised a night of unpredictability, a chance for the established order to waver under the weight of human longing. At midday, Lady Westwick herself walked along the corridor, her eyes sharp as she inspected the servants. Violet instinctively lowered her gaze, heart pounding. For a moment, she recalled Thomas's kind words and the gentle intensity in his eyes. That memory steadied her. She rose from her tasks with quiet resolve. Today, she would carry herself as more than a scullery maid. She would be a person with dreams and courage. After her work, Violet found a moment of solace in the small garden behind the stables. The late afternoon air was cool, carrying the fresh aroma of cut grass and budding roses. She sat on a weathered stone bench, and unfolded Thomas's story. The lines of his handwriting captured the rhythm of a life that was both fragile and strong. His words spoke of resilience, of a future where identities were not confined by class or circumstance, and where love could defy expectations. Violet read each sentence with rapt attention, her eyes bright with hope. She resolved to keep his written promise in her heart, letting it guide her in the days ahead. Later that evening, news of the ball stirred even among the servants. Edith, having returned to her usual role in the upper household, seemed to regard Violet with a new glimmer of understanding. In a quiet moment before supper, Edith approached her near the kitchen doorway. The air between them was charged with an unspoken acknowledgement of shared experience. "Violet, I heard about the ball," Edith said softly. "I wonder if you will be permitted to attend as a guest in any way." Violet hesitated. "I have no expectancies in that world. I remain here to serve." Edith frowned, then said, "Sometimes one must dare to step beyond what is assigned. Perhaps there is a way to have a night free from duty, even if only for a few hours." The proposition unsettled Violet. While her heart yearned to experience the world Thomas had described in his verse, she also knew the risks. A servant seen among the guests could incur severe punishment. Yet the thought of spending one night amid the opulence and warmth of true companionship was almost irresistible. Over the next few days, Violet pondered Edith's suggestion and Thomas's gentle urgings. She recalled his notebook, the trembling sincerity in his voice, and the promise of a different self. Gradually, the idea took shape in her mind. With careful discretion, she resolved to take one chance, one small step into that unfamiliar territory. On the night of the ball, the Westwick estate was transformed. Lanterns and electric lights cast a soft glow over the manicured lawns. Elegant carriages and intricately dressed guests gathered in the grand entrance. Behind the scenes, the servants moved with a heightened purpose, aware that tonight every mistake might be magnified. Violet felt an electric blend of fear and anticipation as she completed her chores. In a quiet corner of the servants' quarters, Edith met her with a discreet look of solidarity. "I have arranged for you a change of attire," Edith whispered. She produced a simple but elegant dress that had once belonged to a distant cousin of Edith's. "It may not be as fine as the silks the ladies wear, but it will serve you well tonight." Violet accepted the dress with trembling hands. The fabric was soft and light, and as she slipped into it, a transformation took place. She saw not a lowly servant, but a young woman of quiet dignity, with the capacity to dream. She retrieved a small pair of gloves from a hidden drawer that Edith had prepared and fixed her hair carefully, using a comb crafted of mother-of-pearl, in the corridors of the manor. The sounds of laughter and music swirled. Violet felt as though she were stepping into another world when she followed the subtle instructions Edith had given her. She made her way to a less guarded door at the rear of the estate, one that led to the servants' entrance into the main hall. The watchful eyes of the household staff were absent for the moment. The attention of the upper class was fixed on the sparkling dance in the ballroom. A quiet hush replaced her earlier nervousness when she entered the grand hall. The air was filled with the soft murmur of conversation, the rustle of satin dresses, and the gentle strains of a string quartet. Violet moved among the guests with care, holding her head high. Every step was measured, every smile deliberate. She felt the eyes of curious onlookers, some noticing her simple attire among the finery, but not daring to speak. Across the room, Thomas stood by a marble column, his gaze searching. When his eyes met Violet's, a surge of relief and joy passed. Between them, without words, he approached her. He offered his arm, and Violet, though nervous, allowed herself to be guided into the crowd. They wandered together through clusters of conversation and laughter, finding moments of quiet exchange. Amid the clamor of the ball, Thomas spoke in a low, sincere tone. "You carry yourself with a grace that I have always admired, Violet. In this world of glitter, you are a reminder of the true beauty that lies beneath our facades." Violet's heart fluttered as she replied softly, "I have learned that life is not defined by the garments we wear, but by the truths we hold dear. Your words have shown me that truth." They shared a gentle conversation, with Thomas asking about her dreams and her hopes. Each word was chosen with care, as if they were painting a picture of a life that might one day be theirs. The night stretched on, and for several precious hours, Violet felt fully alive, embraced by a warmth that transcended the rigid boundaries of her station. When the final strains of music echoed in the vast hall, the spell of the ball began to fade. Guests prepared to depart, and the doors started to close on that glittering world. Thomas and Violet found themselves standing together at the threshold of an uncertain future. As the night ended, Thomas pressed a small folded note into her hand, promising that their conversation was only beginning. Violet stepped back into the cool night air, with a heart both heavy and joyful. She had tasted a freedom that seemed almost impossible, and had shared in a moment of genuine connection that defied convention. In that delicate twilight between duty and desire, she realized that each secret act of bravery sowed the seeds of change. Though the risks were many and the path uncertain, she resolved in her heart that her life would never again be confined solely to the roles assigned to her. The promise of a new beginning glimmered in her eyes as she walked home along the quiet lanes. Every step carried the echo of that magical night, every breath a testimony to the hope that had taken root within her. In the world of stark divisions and unyielding expectations, Violet had discovered a truth that would endure far beyond the fleeting hours of a ball: that within even the humblest heart lies the power to dream, to love, and to transform one's own fate. The morning after the ball, the manor woke slower than usual. Silver trays of leftover tarts sat forgotten in side rooms. Crystal glasses half filled with cordial remained perched on windowsills, and everywhere there lingered the faint ghostly scent of perfume and candle smoke. For most of the household, it was a day of clearing, folding, and scrubbing. For Violet, it was something else entirely. She'd slipped back into her plain scullery dress before dawn, her hands once again plunged into pails of greasy water. Yet something inside her had not changed back. As she scrubbed the edge of a roasting pan, her mind kept returning to the marble floor of the ballroom, the hush of violins, and Thomas's quiet voice beside her. Her body moved through its usual rhythm, but she was not the same girl who had polished brass by candlelight just a week ago. She felt it most when she touched the folded note Thomas had given her the night before. It was tucked in her apron pocket, unopened. She hadn't dared read it until the house settled. But now, with the kitchen momentarily quiet and the back door open to the morning breeze, she pulled it out and smoothed the creases. Violet, last night was not a dream to me. It was a moment I will carry all my life. If you will have it truly, we'll speak with my father. Not about you as a maid, but about the girl I danced with beneath chandeliers. I will not lie about who you are. You are someone I admire, someone I respect, someone I wish to know better openly, and not in secret. But I cannot do this without your consent. I won't bring you harm or shame. If you wish me to stop, say so, and I will. But if not, your heart holds even a little space for the same hope. Meet me next Sunday at the edge of the orchard. No costumes, no pretenses, just us. Yours, Thomas. She held the letter in both hands, reading it over and over. A lump formed in her throat. A choice now stood before her, clear as morning light. That afternoon, as the scullery returned to its usual clatter and steam, Violet caught sight of Edith standing quietly in the doorway. Her pale face was calm, but her eyes asked a question. "Did you go?" Edith said softly. "I did." Edith smiled faintly. "And was it what you hoped?" "Yes," Violet said, "and more." "I used to think we had no power," Edith said, "that we were caged birds, trained to sing in drawing rooms, and never ask for more. But I see now it's not just the world that binds us. Sometimes, it's our fear of it." She reached out and squeezed Violet's arm, gently. "Whatever you choose to do, I want you to know something." "What?" "You were brilliant," she said. "You were brave." The following Sunday arrived, gray and cool. The orchard was quiet, the trees shedding their blossoms in a soft wind. Violet stood by the wall, in her everyday clothes, boots worn, apron clean but faded. She had no silk, no ribbon. She wore only herself. Thomas appeared on the path not long after. He was not in a tailored jacket or fine shoes. He wore his old shirt and sturdy boots, hair tousled by the wind. When he saw her, he slowed, but the smile that spread across his face was unguarded. They met halfway. "You came," he said. "I did." They stood facing one another, the breeze stirring the grass around them. "I don't know what comes next," Violet said. "I don't know what your father will say, or what the town will think." "I don't either," Thomas replied. "But I'd rather face it with you than pretend the world is something it's not." She watched a petal tumble through the air and land between them. "I don't want to leave everything behind," she said. "I'm not ashamed of who I am. I've worked hard for every crust and every breath. I don't want to disappear into your world and lose myself." He nodded. "Then don't. Make a place in it." "Will you let me?" she asked. "I won't just let you," he said. "I'll fight for it." She smiled then. And in that moment, they both knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be scandal. There would be whispers. There would be cold shoulders at dinner parties and judgment from people who lived by lines written long before they were born. But there would also be honesty and freedom, and days filled with the quiet courage of choosing one another again and again. Months passed. The Westwick estate entered a new season. Guests came and went. Servants turned over. The rhythm of the house changed, subtly and permanently. Thomas did speak to his father. It caused a storm. But storms pass. Eventually, Violet left the scullery. She did not go as a runaway or a secret, but as a woman whose hands bore the signs of labor, whose voice held steadiness, and whose heart carried a letter in ink and hope. She did not become a lady in the traditional sense. She didn't want to, but she became a writer. Quietly at first. She wrote about hearth fires and soap, about power and silence, about the sharp contrast of porcelain and skin. Thomas encouraged her every step. They married in a modest ceremony. No carriages, no chandeliers. Just a garden, Edith weeping softly in the second row, and a new life beginning. They settled in a modest cottage near the edge of the estate, where Violet kept a kitchen garden and wrote longhand by the window. Sometimes she read her drafts aloud, while Thomas made tea. In time. Her first book was published under the name Violet Meadows. It bore a dedication to the girl who lived in ash and almond soap, and to the man who saw her clearly.